Hello and welcome to Write On, the podcast from Final Draft. This is the show where we talk about all things screenwriting. I'm your host, Phil Galasso. Today we have an interview with Sera Gamble, showrunner of You, now entering its third season on Netflix.
In my history of scared, this is the most scared I've ever been.
Congratulations, Dad. It's a boy.
I've always believed in the one. But being your dad is changing me. For you, I'd move to some soulless suburb.
Come latte with us.
For you, I'd marry the monster your mother loved. What could go wrong?
We both have done bad things. I think we need to go to couples therapy.
This came sooner than expected.
Neither one of you is going to kill your spouse. You're many things, but you are not murderers.
Till death do us part.
Sera and I discussed how central voiceover is to the DNA of the show, the unique father-son dynamic between Joe and his newborn son, how the writers plot out each season, and more. Check it out. Well, Sera, thank you for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So season 3, where are we at these days? Give our listeners an idea of what to expect.
Well, Joe and Love have had a baby and moved to the suburbs. So it's, a season about a perfect marriage, perfect parenthood. Nothing weird happens at all.
Nothing at all.
Yeah.
In season 3 of a show, when you're approaching it, how do you approach a new season? Do you set up, do you figure out the story you want to tell just for this season? Do you, figure out how it fits in with the previous 2 seasons? Right at the beginning, what are you doing?
I mean, we definitely go from way zoomed out and we slowly zoom in as we start to break the season. But we have definitely had a conversation about how the seasons fit together, largely in having conversations with Penn about the long arc of his character. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, beyond having some sense of where we might want to go next after this, we are mostly totally focused on what is the story of this season? What kind of story do we want to tell? And we have a strong smoke 'em if you got 'em kind of feeling. If there's a good idea, we're putting it in now. Who knows if we'll have another season? So if it's good, we have to spend it.
In terms of just keeping things fresh, obviously the premise is sort of inverted or contorted in new ways this season. How do you, we spend so much time with Joe and now Love to a certain extent, but how do you keep things interesting and exciting? How are you generating new ideas and new spins on the premise?
To begin with, we give ourselves total permission to go in a new direction. This is not one of those premises that you can repeat in the same way for more than one season. We knew when we were making season 1, we will never be able to tell exactly this kind of story again, because now the viewers are on to us. And this show is only really fun if it's surprising. So we're forced to step outside of the previous box every time. And the way we do that is that we start by asking ourselves, thematically, what kind of stuff do we want to talk about? How does the essential theme of the show in terms of love and obsession and our twisted ideas about romance in this culture and our complete and total lack of privacy in the modern age, how do those things connect with the situation we've stuck Joe in this season? And we just go from there.
And I want to talk a little bit about the relationship between Joe, with Joe and Love, because I feel like, there's a sort of, I guess we can spoil it a little bit. Now, certainly the event after the events of season 2 and where they're at in their relationship now, they're sort of co-conspirators in this life of theirs. And I'm curious, what was that as you're writing it, was that exciting to be able to have actual dialogue versus so much of it being internalized by Joe?
Yeah. I mean, we were hiding a certain amount of things about Love in season 2, and there is a freedom in knowing who she really is. For example, it's really fun to do an episode where you step outside Joe's voiceover and you get inside somebody else's head in some way. Mm-hmm. We couldn't do that with Love in season 2 without giving away more than we wanted to. So we get to do it in season 3 because because you know what she's up to.
Because the audience is in on it now.
Yeah.
And you mentioned voiceover. I think something that writers, screenwriters are always told is, show, don't tell, voiceover. But the voiceover is integral. It's essential to the DNA of this show. Can you talk about your approach to voiceover and how you guys tread such a fine line? Because you're deepening the character. You're not explaining what's on screen, but it could be in lesser hands overwhelming. Just talk about your approach to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm very familiar with the thing where we're snobby about voiceover and we don't want to use it. And I don't mind that voiceover has such a bad reputation because it forced us to really ask ourselves why we were using it. And in this case, it's a particular, very specific tool that is about putting you inside the mind of somebody who is either saying very little or actively lying in every single scene he's in. He has so much voiceover because he's lying so goddamn much in every episode. Because the tension of the voiceover is always the tension between what Joe looks and acts and sounds like to the other people in the scene and what he sounds like to us inside of his head. So the voiceover is never going to tell you something you could find out any other way.
Mm-hmm. And this season has the additional wrinkle of Joe talking to his son. And there's a sort of dialogue there in a weird way that I found very fun. Can you talk about that relationship a little bit? I mean, because it's very different than most father-son dynamics you see on television.
We had some good baby actors. That's part of why we were able to cut to them for reaction shots. And especially if you're thinking of the one early in the season, Silvertree, our producing director, directed that. And she's very good with very, very young actors. That's hard, by the way, on a short day. Like we were shooting shorter hours because of COVID, and nothing more terrifying to your director than just like, here's a baby, hope it doesn't cry. But I think, one thing that's kind of exciting about Joe is he is in denial about a lot of things about himself, but he's not in denial that he had a really horrible childhood and that he doesn't have good role models or tools to be a father. Yet it's really important to him not to continue that legacy of his family. So he is appealing to his son sometimes very directly because he sees his son as a baby, but he also just sees his son as this human being, this separate, autonomous human being who might be irrevocably messed up by dad. To me, that's like some of the most compelling work Penn does all season because it's really honest and I think it's really relatable.
Yeah, I mean, something I wasn't expecting watching the episodes I've seen so far of this season, bringing a child into it and the whole family dynamic, there is an earnestness to the characters there, Joe especially, that he wants to be good. He wants to be a good dad. He wants to be a good husband. He maybe idealizes it in the wrong ways, but there is I don't know. I found myself more sympathetic to that character than I have been in the past. And I'm curious if that's something that you guys, were aware of, or it's just sort of a byproduct of the story you're telling.
I think it's a byproduct. We try to steer clear of being too obsessive about trying to manipulate you into thinking one thing or another about this like objectively frequently terrible person. But we also, I don't think that there's a show there if Joe is just a killer who's fine with being a killer and doesn't care about anyone and is totally selfish. I think the thing that's interesting is that there are so many parts of him that really do line up with our idea of a man who is trying to be a good man. He's just getting it very wrong a lot of the time and doing like some significant lying to himself. But I think it's not an accident because we are really hard on ourselves. The writers are really hard on themselves when they're writing emotional scenes for any character to ground that, make it realistic. Like the plot can fly off into crazy places and does, but the emotion, the motivation, like what the characters are going through, we want to make sure you always can track it and go, yeah, that makes sense considering.
You mentioned that you guys have a sort of smoke them if you got them mentality in the writer's room. Are there ever ideas that are just too far outside the box or that you're like, we can't go there? I'm just curious because it seems like the show there might not be a box to put it in that respect.
I don't think we've hit that wall yet. It's pretty fun, by the way, to work on a show where it is kind of like no situation too crazy. I mean, definitely we toe that line and we shape things as we go. But I think in any writer's room, if you're running a writer's room, part of your job is to create an environment where people are brave enough to pitch the idea they're afraid might be like hilariously terrible. I mean, for what it's worth, I think everybody in our room has a lot of fun pitching the wildest version. Yeah. And frequently those are the ones we go with. So
no complaints here. Something that's been a part of the show since the beginning, but I feel has like kind of grown, and there's a new spin on it. This season is the sort of satirical, cultural satire element of it. This season is going hard on like momfluencers and suburban life, and I'm curious, how is that layered into your writing process? That whole element of the show, because it is sort of separate from the the main storyline, but it's always kind of there. In terms of the side characters and the neighborhood they inhabit and the different stories. How are you guys weaving that in with the story you're trying to tell?
You're right. It is another aspect of the show beyond the romantic love drive of the show. But what it has in common is it's about being inside Joe's head. We like to put him in situations where he's apt to judge the hell out of everybody else in the room. And so we tend to put him into like bubbles of privilege, where he feels like he's the only kind of grounded real person sometimes in those situations. And the social media of it all, it was really built into the matrix of the show from the beginning, because when we were first making the show, first pitching the show, that was right when Mr. Robot happened, which is a brilliant show about a guy who's super genius with computers and the internet. And so that show already existed. Like there was no point in making a show about someone who can stalk women because he's brilliant. And it was scarier to explore a show about a guy who's pretty average and normal. He's a smart guy, but he doesn't have any tools you or I don't have. He's just motivated. And that is the actual everyday danger that we all live with in a world that pretty much demands our online presence, whether we want it or not. So everything started there with his relationship with Beck in particular. And since then, we've just been following the little octopus legs and exploring different facets of, basically we're in a full-on surveillance state at this point.
It's true. I'm curious. So you mentioned working in the writer's room. How do you build a room when okay, it's season 3, you're ready to go. What's the first thing you do when you're building out your writer's room?
Well, let's assume that everybody I meet with is an amazing writer, because it starts with samples that you get sent. There's a certain amount of balancing experience. That's almost kind of the easy part. You meet people who are experienced at producing, and you meet people who are greener, and you try to get a mix. And then in the case of you, there were certainly people I met with I was especially interested in because they had some understanding of the circles in New York that they were moving through in season 1. But I really like building a room where people come from dramatically different writing backgrounds, where their interests are, and this is true, like the Magician's writer's room was not all comprised of fantasy lovers or like comic book writers. It's good to have somebody in there who is passionate about procedurals or law or, so I think of the Tetris as being about just finding people who are interesting and different and have really different points of view about the world, and then put them all together because they're going to have like a really rich discussion about this subject matter. I'll just also add that I know that writers, at least when I was going out for staffing meetings, I was always like really concerned with wanting to prove that I was good at that exact type of writing, that exact genre of writing. But frequently the technicalities are pretty easy to teach. Like if I was doing a horror show and we met and you were like, love this, don't know that much about horror. It's like, here's a surprise for you. Like every single scare scene is built exactly the same way. Cause that happened to me in my career. Eric Kripke hired me for Supernatural. I wrote a few scripts the hard way in retrospect. And one day he was like, did you know that every scare scene has the same formula? And I was like, no, I feel like I've been inventing the wheel. And he was just like, yeah, here's where you open the cabinet and the cat jumps out. And here's where the person wipes frame behind the guy. And I was just like, oh my God, it is the same every time. So that part is not important to me at all, is my point. You can all learn from each other, like whatever your little area of expertise is.
Are there things that when you were on other show staffs as a writer, you mentioned Supernatural and Magicians, what were some of the things you learned there that have made you a good showrunner in your mind, or have, taught you how to be a showrunner? Having been on staff, I think helps me a lot, just because I think I do understand what it feels like to be the greenest writer in the room and, being a showrunner. And I'm not saying this because I expect any sympathy. I mean, it's a really cool job and nobody needs to tell me, oh, poor you, you're really busy. But the point of being a showrunner is that you're juggling a lot of things every day. As a result, everybody's particular problems
that they bring to you, they shrink down to the size of how it slots into your day because you're dealing with like 18 of them, right?
Sure.
But I started as a staff writer where that little cube of the showrunner's day that was staff writers going to pitch a batch of 4 ideas, that was my week, 24 hours a day. Like I was losing sleep over that. It was so, like borderline traumatic. Like I was so worried I was going to get fired and would never work in TV again, like every moment of the day of my first job, that it's just seared into my mind. So actually, whenever I'm starting a season, I really start by thinking like, what can I do to try to make the newest people in the room feel comfortable and like the pressure is off for that first couple of weeks so they can start to get comfortable with the people they're working with.
I think that's really cool. How was your room and production experience different this year because of COVID? I have to imagine it made things quite difficult.
It's certainly different. Thank God we could do it. We opened the writer's room in February of 2020 when there was like
good timing.
There was some crazy stuff happening in China that we were all following. And we were all saying, wow, if it comes here, doesn't seem like our country's in shape to really unite to stop it right away. So let's hope it doesn't. We didn't have any idea what it was going to be. There just was a day shortly before the city shut down where it became clear we all needed to just go home and learn how to do it on Zoom. So everything was remote. The production itself, because obviously actors cannot be masked during their scenes, and we have a lot of intimacy on our show. There was a lot of very strict regulation of people not being within 6 feet of each other, wearing PPE at all times. There was daily testing. There are so many things that you take for granted about being able to get a certain type of location or a certain number of extras, or even like a certain kind of costume and the supply chain. Like we could talk for an hour about all like everything from supply chains to how many people can social distance on our standing set at one time. And just all of that played into it. But by the time we could shoot, which was around November, it was supposed to be the summer, but it was pushed. Everybody was so motivated to figure out how to do it safely. Everyone had kind of been sitting it out. They had been in lockdown. They were really worried about their jobs. And we all wanted to prove that there was a way to do it safely so we could keep doing it so everyone could have their jobs. Our positivity rate was extremely low. And we had long stretches where we didn't have to shut down for even a day. And that's because the crew and the cast and everybody really took care of each other.
That's great to hear. Take a quick step back. You mentioned that first job you had as a staff writer. When did your love for TV writing first blossom? How early did you know you wanted to be a writer?
I knew I was a writer even as a kid. I didn't really think of it as a career. I thought of it as, there were times when I was like, I'm going to grow up to be a writer when I was like 8. I had other ideas about what I would be doing for a job. And I thought that writing would be the thing that I did for myself because it was always so therapeutic. And then, I was doing theater. I was an actor. I was writing theater. I met someone, we were writing screenplays together, Rael Tucker, who was my writing partner for a long time. She's also a showrunner. And we were aiming for features at that time. And we got a little bit of traction by entering screenplay competitions and making the finals of Project Greenlight. And that was like just enough to get a couple of agents to take a glance at our script. And the one who said, I really like the script, I'd really like to represent you, was Sue Nagel, who was an incredible TV agent for a long time. And she was the one who was like, well, if you want consistent work and if you want to see your script actually be produced in the same year you write it, you need to be working on the TV side. And it's not that I had any block against it. I just had never really thought about it. So she was the one who said, write a few specs. Here's the specs, the kind of specs you should write. And then you're going to do staffing season. And she actually said to me, and then the stars will align at the right time and you'll get a staff job. So I credit her with kind of pointing us in that direction. And
I have to imagine that not actually making it to the final stages of Project Greenlight was actually a blessing in disguise. Because having watched all those seasons of that show, it doesn't seem like it ever went really well.
I don't think being on those shows longer was better necessarily. Yeah. Although, those people were all very nice, but I was always pretty cool with not winning.
Last thing before we go, is there something that you learned over the course of your career that you wish you knew when you were first starting out?
This is a funny question because I just don't think I would listen to myself, I was so sure about it. Not sure about things like I knew, but just so uptight about them, It has taken me a long time in this particular business to start to understand that you don't have to be perfect at everything. Like the goal is not necessarily to be unimpeachable on every possible level, that actually we all know that we have our specialties, and the rest, it's about getting like a baseline of being able to do it well enough. Right. And I think because I was so incredibly focused on wanting to make a career, it's not like I had a fallback. I really needed the health insurance. It would not have been cool to be like, nope, you're never going to be in a room again. I put an incredible amount of pressure on myself to be like the most perfect possible TV writer. And in retrospect, I could have been having more fun than I was having. Like not everything had to be that high stress,
I think that's a nice note to end on. Don't kill yourself too early.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Sarah, thank you for taking the time to chat. Congrats on the new season of the show. I'm sure everybody's going to love it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thanks again to Sarah Gamble for coming on the show. Season 3 of You is streaming right now on Netflix. And as always, thanks to you, our listeners. If you liked this episode, leave us a review, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the show on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. For news about new episodes and more, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at Final Draft Inc., and on Instagram at Final Draft Screenwriting. This podcast was produced by Kayla Guest and co-produced by Emma Vranich. Editing is by Sean Bonnet. Music is by T. Kelly. Thanks again, everyone. Until next time, right on.